what the hell is this? Why can't I make my layers? Why can't I drag everything into one layer? Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's your good sis Lisa Patz, and today we have a video on Photoshop versus Illustrator. Now, I just want to give you like a little bit of background to me and why I'm interested in Photoshop and Illustrator and my journey with them. So when I was probably about 13, I saw my sister using Photoshop and I was like, what the flip is that? How the hell are you doing that? She was editing her avatar on IMVU. If any of you know what IMVU is, I really hope some of you do, because that's a throwback and a half. But she was editing her avatar and she was putting like text over it. She was like editing the skin on Photoshop, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. So I pretty much copied her and did the same thing for mine. I got her to help me make some stuff. In my GCSEs, I did fine art, and I thought that you could only do like sculpting and painting and printing, things like that. I spoke to my teacher about doing Photoshop and using Photoshop to edit images and submitting that as my final work, and they said yes, and I was like, yes, like, oh yes, like, because I love painting and I love sculpting and all that, but I just don't, I'm not a messy person. Like I think my room is like an organized mess, but I just don't like getting messy. So for me, Photoshop became that medium of I can create and go wild and experiment, but I don't have to clean up after myself. This is lit. Yeah, that's my beginnings with Photoshop. I've been using it since then. So I'm now 22. I've been using it since I was 14, and I feel like I really got to know Photoshop very, very well. And then later on in life, I started to look at Illustrator. When I went to uni was probably when I really first delved into Illustrator, and I actually use Illustrator now more than I use Photoshop, which is mad because I never thought that that would be me. I always was like, nah, Photoshop is better than Illustrator, nah. But now I realized they both have their uses. So we're gonna do like a comparison of the similarities and differences between Photoshop and Illustrator and how you'd use them. So first we're going to look at the format of the two. So for Photoshop, you're going to use that to edit images. You can kind of like enhance or add to an image. The images are always going to be pixel based. You can create a digital image and put that online somewhere for other people to see. So an example of this is like if you had a photo shoot, those pictures you could take into Photoshop and edit them. So you could enhance the coloring, or you could edit out blemishes, things like that. For Illustrator, you usually create images on Illustrator. So 9 times out of 10, you'll start from a blank page and then create something on there. And they're vector-based images. So usually it's a lot better to print your images from Illustrator because it will be a lot sharper and a lot clearer. So an example of this is a logo, or if you wanted to create a pattern for fashion, then you'd use Illustrator to do that 9 times out of 10. Now I have to mention that they can be interchanged depending on what you're trying to achieve, but I'll touch on that later. So the next section is zoom. So when you zoom into a picture on Photoshop, it's usually going to be blurry and out of focus, and just sometimes you can see the pixels, but 9 times out of 10 you can't really see the pixels. It's just going to be really blurry, and again that's because it's pixel based. Whereas on Illustrator, when you zoom in, the pictures stay sharp and you can really edit the exact detail of things. This is why it's better to print using Illustrator, because you're going to get that exact line. With Photoshop, you run the risk of getting like your jagged pixelated lines. So for the text on each platform, on Photoshop, you can use big text, small text, whatever you want. But whenever you do use small text, sometimes it can be very pixelated and harder to read. Whereas on Illustrator, the text will always stay very sharp. So if you are using a lot of small text, then it might be best to use Illustrator rather than Photoshop for that. So in each platform, we have layers. So on Photoshop, within one layer, you can have multiple objects, multiple items. Whereas on Illustrator, in each layer, it is one item within a layer. You can make up your layer with one item. Does that make sense? So I'll show you examples, but with Photoshop, you can put different pictures into one layer and kind of merge them by doing that. Whereas on Illustrator, each item has its own layer. You can group things, but at the end of the day, they're still gonna have their own layer. I hope that makes sense. I'll show a way that will make it clear what I'm talking about, because I feel like when I first started using Illustrator, I was like, what the hell is this? Why can't I make my layers? Why can't I drag everything into one layer? It doesn't work like that. So for your work area on Photoshop, you can only work on your work area. So you usually have a grey background, and then you have your white box or white square, whatever it is that you're working in. And within this space, that's what you can edit. You can edit what's on that space. If it leaves that space, sometimes it will cut it off, so you won't be able to access what leaves that space anymore. Whereas with Illustrator, you can kind of use the whole screen as your space. You can jump out of that box or out of that white square and use the edges of the page to create more images or create more logos, whatever it is that you're doing. And then you can bring it back onto the white square and print it, or you can add an artboard behind it and print it that way. It's a little bit more free in that way. Illustrator is a little bit more free in terms of your positioning and your workspace. So the next thing we'll talk about is artboards. So with artboards, you can optimize your workflow by keeping everything within your same workspace, but having them on different artboards so that you can really separate them. So with Photoshop, you do have the option to use artboards, but they don't work as well as they do in Illustrator. I feel like artboards aren't optimized for Photoshop. There is the option of using them, but I just think in general it usually works better to just have one artboard on Photoshop, or not even think about using them at all, because it's just not as seamless as it is on Illustrator, where you can very easily add multiple artboards, and then you can create a layer for each artboard and put the same image into that other layer and change it so that you can really compare them very easily, especially if you're trying to show or compare two designs. You can put them on the two artboards and then have a look, see which one looks best. And I think it's a lot easier to experiment on Illustrator than it is on Photoshop. You have a bit more freedom to transfer your idea from here to there and change one thing and look at the difference that makes. Whereas with Photoshop, because you know artboards aren't that seamless on there, you can make a new layer and then hide that layer and change something on the other one and unhide that layer and look at that layer and then unhide that, you know, but it's just not as seamless. So when it comes to selections on Photoshop and Illustrator, on Photoshop you can select part of things. You do have a bit more freedom to like cut things out, or if you wanted to remove a background, it's best to do something like that on Photoshop, because you have the freedom to kind of draw around it and cut that out. Whereas with Illustrator, when you select something, it selects the whole thing. So if you wanted to cut the background out, I honestly don't know how you do that on Illustrator. If you know how to do that, let me know, because I don't know how to do that on Illustrator, but I do know how to do that on Photoshop. So that would be very interesting. From what I'm aware, there's not a way to cut out parts of a shape unless it's a vector shape, and then you can go in with the white arrow and take parts of that out. But if it's an image that you've put into Illustrator, you wouldn't be able to cut out the background or cut out a part of that shape. Another difference between the two is on Photoshop, you can edit videos or you can create videos. If you were to create a GIF, then you can use Photoshop to do that. It's very easy. You just have to make a timeline and then you have the freedom to make a video of some sort. With Illustrator, there is no option to make any videos. Even when you export, there's no option to make any videos. So it's very much still images and print-based stuff that you're making on Illustrator. Now, I wanna emphasize that you can use both. There's no rule that says that you can't use both, especially if you were making like a thumbnail on YouTube. If you wanted to, you could cut out the background behind your head. Like say for example, me right now, let's take a screenshot. And I'm gonna cut out the background behind my head on Photoshop, take it into Illustrator, put a white outline around my body. Now the way I'm going to do this is take a copy of me, and once you've image traced it, you can choose different ways to trace that image. So I would trace it as a silhouette, and then you can use that to outline me. I hope that makes sense. I think my main goal with this is showing the differences and making sure it's clear what you use what for. I think with all of the entire Adobe suite, you hear so much about Photoshop, Illustrator, Lightroom, After Effects, InDesign, Premiere Pro, Dimension, all of this stuff, and no one really explains like how to use it or what its purpose is, or how would I use that in my everyday life. I use Photoshop every day, I use Illustrator every day, I use Premiere Pro every day. So for me, I obviously know how to use it, but I know that so many people are interested in it, but they don't know where to start, they don't know which one they need to start with. And especially considering that Photoshop is £20 per month or £19.99 per month. Illustrator, I'm pretty sure, is the same price per month. That's £20 a month that you're investing into yourself or into your product, and you might not be getting the right thing. So I think it's really important that we make some clarity around them. I will be putting the differences that I was talking about here so that you guys can see them really clearly. I really hope this video helped make sense of Photoshop and Illustrator. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you want me to do any more of these, more things like this. I do plan on doing more things like this because this is something that I've always been interested in, and I've been doing it for like 8 years. So I feel like I couldn't not talk about it on my channel, you know. I hope this helped you make sense of Photoshop and Illustrator. If you have any more questions, please put them in the comment box below and I'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. Like, rate, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.